The Cincinnati Bengals, a franchise that has seen mediocrity up until the 2021 season, when they played in Super Bowl 56. Since 2020, the Bengals have drafted a potential championship caliber roster for the unseeable future. As for fantasy football, Cincinnati has become a hotspot for high round picks in many drafts. It's time to take a look at why that is. How is everyone doing today? My name is Aaron, and this is the Gameday Hour. Welcome to episode 4 of the Fantasy Football Team Review. In this series, we take a look at each and every 32 NFL franchises and see what they offer for fantasy football. Here, we analyze the team's quarterback, running back, wide receiver 1 and 2, tight end, and kicker. Our goal is to analyze last season and see if these players are worth drafting, and if so, when and where. Today, we analyze the Cincinnati Bengals.
Joe Burrow, Cincinnati Bengals quarterback.
Joe Burrow, Joe Cool, it's all the same to him because Joe Burrow has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in the last 5 years. Joe Burrow started his career off in 2020. He ended up getting injured. The year following, he ended up making it to Super Bowl 56, and last year to the AFC Championship where they ended up losing to Kansas City. Joe Burrow, as far as fantasy football goes, has been one of the best quarterbacks so far. So let's take a look at last year's stats to see why that is. He played 16 games last year. He had 414 completions, that's 5th among all quarterbacks, and 606 attempts, which is 5th. Again, I was talking about you want to have your completions be better than your attempts. They're the same, so 68.3% of his passes made, that's 2nd among all quarterbacks, just behind Geno Smith. He had 4,475 passing yards, that's 5th. 35 touchdowns, that's tied for 2nd, and he had 12 interceptions, which is tied for 105th. In the overall scheme, he had 411 total fantasy points, and again, we're going with PPR. That is 4th among all quarterbacks. Fun fact, I had him in fantasy in that 2021 Super Bowl run, and we have different type of scoring, so it's not like PPR, but I picked him up midway through the season after having just terrible quarterbacks, and Joe Burrow ended up, and I'm not even kidding when I say this, had 3 games over 80 points in that season. 2 of them came back-to-back. 1 of them came in a losing effort in the playoffs. I almost made the championship game if it wasn't for the Miami Dolphins defense. We'll get to them in another video. But now we have his projections. Would I draft him? Of course I would. I've had him before and I'd have him again. He's a quarterback 1, rounds 1 through 4. If you want to see some high-octane scoring, get Joe Burrow. He has a great receiving core around him. He has so many weapons, and he's a very good quarterback that you want to have on your team. It doesn't matter who's on the board. If he's there and he's the best available and you need a quarterback, do not pass up Joe Burrow. So overall, I'm very excited to see what the Cincinnati Bengals do this year with Joe Burrow at quarterback. Hopefully he plays every game. Hopefully his receivers get to play every game. And if they do, someone's going to have fun on fantasy. Guarantee it.
Joe Mixon, Cincinnati Bengals running back.
Next up, we have Joe Mixon. He's been one of the top backs in the league for the past 5 years, but he has a little bit of question marks going into this year, which we'll address in a minute. But let's take a look at his statistics last year. Last year, he played 14 games. He had 210 carries, which was tied for 16th. He had 814 rushing yards, which was 27th. He had 7 touchdowns. That's tied for 16th as well. But a lot of his damage also came in the passing game. He had 60 receptions for 441 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. So he had 9 touchdowns throughout the year, which leads him to 229 total fantasy points for PPR. And that is 10th among all running backs. So I'm trying to imagine what a 16 to 17 game year would look like for Joe Mixon. He could have potentially gotten over 1,000 rushing yards along with that many receiving yards. He could have put up a lot more points, maybe even sneaked a little higher in the top 10. Which then leads us to his projections. Would I draft him? Yes, though there are question marks, and I know you're reading at the bottom of the screen. Running back 1 and 2. He's a low 1, he's a high 2, so I see him being drafted in rounds 2 through 8, depending on how your draft goes. Maybe you get a running back in round 2 because all the great running backs start going off early. But the off-field warning is coming from a few allegations that have stirred up over the offseason, which we're not going to really get into. Just know there's allegations and that's it. So I say as far as round 8 because legitimately he can go further than that. However, with the off-field warning, you also want to have a backup plan. And that backup plan for the Cincinnati Bengals is P. Ryan. Keep an eye out for him, and in case that Joe Mixon loses time off the field, have a backup plan when ready. Overall, for Joe Mixon, I like his style of play. I like what he brings to the Cincinnati Bengals, and he's a very good running back for what Joe Burrow is doing. Just keep an eye out for the warnings and be cautious when drafting him.
Ja'Marr Chase. Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver 1.
We have Ja'Marr Chase, and just for these two wide receivers, I would take any one of them and be completely happy. Both can put up wide receiver 1 type stats. But we're going to start with Ja'Marr Chase, who was drafted in 2021, and whoa, is he a prospect. He is a big prospect to have on fantasy football. As a matter of fact, I have been doing mock fantasy drafts, been putting them on Twitter, so if you want to go check it out, Twitter link will be in the description. And when you do a Yahoo fantasy draft or a mock draft, Ja'Marr Chase is the 3rd best player to draft. And we're going to see why that is. He only played 12 games last year. And in those 12 games, he had 87 receptions, which was 14th. He had 1,046 receiving yards in 12 games. So that's almost averaging 100 yards a game, just slightly below, which was 17th among all wide receivers. It could have been more. 9 touchdowns, that's tied for 6th. And he had 238 total fantasy points for PPR. Chances are he would have been much higher had he played the extra 4 or 5 games if it wasn't for injury. So if he's able to play a full season and he's putting up these type of stats, you want him on your team. Which then leads us to the projections. Would I draft him? I've already mock drafted him, so yes, I would definitely draft him. He's a wide receiver 1 for sure. Rounds 1 through 3, even though I'm pretty sure he's going to go in the first round more often than not. So maybe he's just a round 1 wide receiver. He isn't my highest ranked wide receiver. You're just going to have to wait for a few more videos to find out who that is. But he is somebody who I highly recommend. As a matter of fact, I highly recommend a lot of these players. So yeah, I would really think long and hard about drafting Ja'Marr Chase. You want him on your team. If he's there, if some running backs go, depending on who you value more, running back or a wide receiver, but if you value wide receivers, he is somebody who you're going to want if you're picking high in the draft. Now we move on to his counterpart.
T. Higgins. Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver 2.
Next up, we have T. Higgins. Now, T. Higgins was drafted prior to Ja'Marr Chase in the 2020 draft alongside Joe Burrow, and he's been a number 2 for 2 seasons. It's where he belongs. He's a really good number 2 wide receiver to back up Ja'Marr Chase, and his stats last year showed just why this might be the best wide receiver core in all of football. He played 16 games last year, 74 receptions, which was 29th. He had 1,029 receiving yards, which is 20th. 7 touchdowns, which is tied for 15th. And he had 214 total fantasy points PPR. That's 19th. That's 8 spots below Ja'Marr Chase. Now, some people are going to say, well, he played 4 more games but had less stats and points. Well, yeah, he did. But still, reliable for a wide receiver 2 and 3, which is what his projection is. He is somebody who I would draft, yes. And again, he is a wide receiver 2. I would say a low 2 or a mid 2 and a definite high 3 just in case you find someone better. And I would draft him in between rounds 4 and 7. And because he's in that 2 and 3 position, he could be used as a potential flex. Now, I want to just warn you guys, get Ja'Marr Chase, get T. Higgins. Try not to get them both together because you're not going to have every single season where both wide receivers have over 1,000 yards. So if you get one, disregard the other. It's also good for bye weeks because you don't want to have the same position have the same bye week, or else you're going to have to potentially drop one. So that's just a little tip for you guys. But if you don't have Ja'Marr Chase and you need a wide receiver 2 or 3, T. Higgins is a good choice. I would recommend.
Irv Smith Jr. Cincinnati Bengals tight end.
Next up, we have the new Cincinnati Bengals tight end, Irv Smith Jr. And Irv has been with the Minnesota Vikings for the last 4 years. He's played 3 seasons there, has always been the backup to either Kyle Rudolph or as the backup to TJ Hawkinson. Now he's about to have a full year as a starter. And if you're wondering what happened to the other Bengals starter, we'll talk about him when we get around to the Carolina Panthers video. As for Irv, last year, he didn't put up that amazing of stats. He only played 8 games, so there's a kind of an injury warning there. He's had 25 receptions with 182 receiving yards. That's not very good. He had 2 touchdowns and only 52 total fantasy points for PPR. That is 42nd in the league. Which then leads me to his projections. He's not a guy I would draft because I just don't see enough of him. I don't really know what he's going to do with the Bengals. He might have an up year, who knows. But if you want to draft him, to me, he's a tight end 2, and I would see him being drafted in the final 5 rounds of the draft. So I don't have a big profile on Irv Smith. He's a young player, hasn't got enough significant playing time, or at least as a starter, but he's about to have a full year as that guy. So let's see what being a starter does for him.
Evan McPherson, Cincinnati Bengals kicker.
Lastly, we have Evan McPherson. Now, McPherson made a name for himself in the Super Bowl run. He made countless, and by countless I mean 2, game-winning field goals, both against Tennessee in the divisional round and Kansas City in the championship game before making it to the Super Bowl. So he is a big name in the kicking department, and as far as fantasy goes, he's up there along with Justin Tucker, just below. But last year, I didn't think he had amazing stats, so let's see. He played 16 games, he was 24 for 29 and made an attempt, so he's only missed 5 field goals last year. So far, out of all the kickers, he's missed the least field goals. So he's 82.8%, that's 28th in the league. Here's the deal. He's 90.9% of his extra points, which is 34th. Now, that's the worst so far of all the kickers we've seen. His long is a 59, which is tied for 6th, and he's made 112 points last year, which is tied for 17th. As far as fantasy goes, 122 total fantasy points for PPR, which is 19th. Which leads me to his projections. I had him projected as a kicker 1. Now I kind of have to sit in between 1 and 2. But he is somebody who I would draft. Wouldn't be my first option, though. I'd see him being drafted as early as round 8 as a kicker 1 and as late as round 13 as a high kicker 2. But with Evan McPherson, he could turn it on at any time. So this season could be his breakout year as the Bengals kicker. So who knows? Maybe Evan McPherson is the number 1 kicker choice and he's not a number 2, but something has to change. You got to get better with the extra points, and he needs to be able to have a better percentage. I know he's had a pretty good one. He needs a better one. And that'll do it for today's episode. Kind of a shorter episode, but these episodes have been getting significantly shorter, which is good. I see that attention span mostly sits in between the 10 to 20 minute range, and going above can be pushing it just a little bit, but it is podcast, so there will be longer podcasts in the future. As for these episodes, let's hope to keep them short, just so I'm not taking up too much time of your day. Again, until somebody finally wins that Eastern Conference Finals, I'm not going to be doing my finals prediction. Hopefully Miami can pull it out, or the Boston Celtics make history, who knows. So be ready for that video in the future. I hope to be working on it at least next week. But yeah, that's going to do it for today. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe. Tap the bell notification so you can be notified when new videos go up. And again, be prepared for more projects. Next up, we are going to start off the NFC North with the Green Bay Packers. So be ready for them. And yeah, I'll see you then. So have a great day. Take care. And I will see you guys later. Bye.